The dusty road stretched endlessly under the blazing afternoon sun. A single wagon rattled down the trail, carrying a young bride whose heart pounded with nervous excitement. She clutched a small suitcase, her only possession, and whispered silent prayers. This was supposed to be the start of her new life, marriage to a man she had never met but had agreed to through letters and arrangements. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind over and over. When the wagon finally stopped, she looked out and saw a sprawling ranch. The land stretched wide, with fences in need of repair and cattle grazing lazily in the fields. A weathered house stood tall at the center, sturdy but worn, as though time and hardship had carved their mark into its wooden walls. She stepped down, adjusting her modest dress and bonnet. A tall man came out from the barn, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. His shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing the strength of years spent working the land. His eyes, however, held no recognition, just surprise and caution. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked in a deep, steady voice. The bride swallowed hard. I'm here to meet my husband." She gave the name of the man she had been promised. To the rancher frowned. He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid you've got the wrong place. That man lives clear on the other side of the county. This here is my ranch." Her breath caught. Wrong place. Her cheeks flushed as embarrassment and panic washed over her. She turned as if the wagon might still be there to take her away, but it was already gone, a cloud of dust vanishing into the distance. The rancher shifted uncomfortably, clearly, not used to unexpected visitors, least of all a bride in wedding attire stranded on his land. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the faint laughter of children playing in the distance. The bride's eyes followed the sound. Two small children were chasing each other in the yard, their giggles filling the air. A little girl with long braids stopped and looked at her with wide, curious eyes. The boy, slightly older, peeked from behind a fence post, cautious like his father. The bride's heart softened. She had been so nervous about meeting her groom, but these innocent faces stirred something inside her. She gave a small wave, and the girl shyly waved back. I'll find a way to leave in the morning," the bride said softly, gathering her composure. "Forgive me for the intrusion." The rancher hesitated. Something in him, perhaps duty, perhaps loneliness, kept him from turning her away immediately. "You can stay the night," he muttered. "It's a long way back to town and the sun's near setting." Relief washed over her, though uncertainty still lingered. She had arrived at the wrong ranch, but little did she know, destiny had just brought her to the right place. The ranch grew quiet after the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The young bride sat at the kitchen table, hands folded nervously in her lap, while the rancher moved about the room, lighting the lamps. The glow revealed a home that was sturdy but weary, like a man who carried more burdens than he could bear. For the first time she truly studied him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the ruggedness of a man who spent every hour under the sun. His hair was dark and unkempt, his jaw shadowed by stubble. But what struck her most was his expression. His face, though handsome, seemed hardened, lined not just by years but by grief. His eyes carried a heaviness, the kind born of sorrow that never quite heals. As he set a plate of bread and stew before her, he said little. He seemed unused to company, as though silence had become his closest companion. The children, however, brought life to the room. The little girl, no more than 6, climbed into her chair with excitement. Her big brown eyes sparkled as she studied, the bride with open curiosity. "Pa, is she going to stay with us?" she asked innocently, spoon in hand. The rancher's jaw tightened. "Just for tonight, Lily," he said firmly. "She'll be on her way come morning." But the girl was not convinced. She smiled sweetly at the bride, as though she already knew something her father did not. The boy, Jacob, about 8 years old, was quieter. He kept his gaze down, carefully eating, though every so often he peeked at the stranger at their table. He was cautious, protective, traits he had likely inherited after watching his father struggle alone. The bride listened to the sound of spoons clinking against bowls, and though it was simple, There was a warmth she hadn't expected. It felt like a family meal, something she had longed for in her own lonely life. When supper was done and the children were put to bed, the bride lingered by the fire, her small suitcase at her feet. The rancher leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed as though debating whether to speak at all. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "You weren't expecting this, were you?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "No, I thought I was starting a new life today. But instead I seem to have lost my way before I even began." He gave a bitter half-smile. "You and me both." She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes flickered to the staircase where his children now slept. His voice softened, carrying the weight of memories. "My wife, Sarah. She passed about 3 years back. Fever took her before I could do a thing. Since then, it's just been me, the boy, and the little one. The ranch don't run itself, and kids don't raise themselves either. Some days I don't know which is harder." The bride's chest tightened at the raw honesty in his tone. She could almost see it. The endless days of work, the long nights of grief, the struggle of trying to fill 2 roles when he barely had the strength for one. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shrugged, though his eyes betrayed the ache in his heart. "Life don't stop for sorrow. Cattle still need feedin', fences still need mendin'. You just keep going." For a moment, silence returned, filled only by the crackle of the fire. The bride looked around the home, the worn furniture, the boots by the door, the half-mended toys on the shelf. This was a place held together by resilience, not ease. "You've done well," she said softly. He gave a rough laugh. "You call this well? Half the time I can't keep the roof from leaking, and the other half I'm praying the cattle don't die off in the heat." He paused, then added more quietly, "But the kids, they're all that matters. I promised Sarah I'd look after them. Haven't broken that promise yet." Her gaze softened. There was something in his words, in the way he carried his burdens silently, that stirred a deep respect inside her. He was rough, yes, but underneath that rugged exterior was a father who had given everything for his children. The bride sat back in her chair, her thoughts heavy. She had come here by mistake, but now she wondered if mistakes were always accidents, or sometimes part of a greater plan. Upstairs, in the quiet of their room, little Lily knelt by her bed, whispering a prayer. Her tiny voice carried through the floorboards almost like a secret meant to be heard. "Dear God, thank you for sending her. Please don't let her leave." The bride froze, heart aching as the words drifted down, and though the rancher tried to hide it, his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion, hope buried deep but not yet gone. The next morning, golden light spilled over the ranch, painting the fields in a soft glow. The bride awoke in a small guest room, simple, but tidy. The bed creaked beneath her as she sat up, reality washing over her once more. She wasn't where she was supposed to be. Her journey had been meant to lead her to her intended husband, a man she had only known through carefully written letters. Yet here she was, stranded on the wrong ranch, under the roof of a stranger. She opened her small suitcase, pulling out the wedding dress she had carefully folded away. It suddenly looked out of place here, in a house that bore the marks of years of hard labor and survival. For a moment, she pressed the fabric to her chest, torn between laughter and tears. Downstairs, the sounds of morning chores drifted through the open window. Chickens squawked, a horse neighed in the distance, and the steady thump of boots echoed against the barn floor. She straightened her dress, tied her bonnet, and stepped outside. The rancher was already at work, lifting hay bales with practiced ease. His son Jacob tried to imitate him, struggling with a small pitchfork nearly too big for his hands. The little girl, Lily, darted about with the energy of a spring breeze, carrying a bucket of chicken feed. When Lily spotted her, she ran forward with a grin. "You came out. I thought you might leave before we woke up." The bride forced a smile. "I'm afraid I can't leave just yet. The wagon won't be back through until tomorrow." The child's eyes lit with unspoken joy. "Then you can help us today." Before she could protest, Lily tugged her hand, leading her toward the chicken coop. The bride hesitated, then knelt, showing the girl how to scoop feed more carefully. Her laughter, light and genuine, rang out when the chickens flapped noisily around them. For a moment it felt almost natural, like she belonged here. The rancher, watching from a distance, frowned slightly. He wasn't used to strangers on his land, much less one who slipped so easily into his children's hearts. He approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You don't need to trouble yourself," he said gruffly. "You're our guest. Best you just rest until the wagon comes." She looked up at him, cheeks flushed from the morning air. "I don't mind helping. It keeps my thoughts occupied." He studied her for a moment, as though trying to understand her. Then, with a curt nod, he allowed it. Throughout the day, she found herself drawn deeper into their routine. She helped Jacob gather eggs, braided Lily's hair while the girl chattered endlessly, and even carried water to the barn. Each task felt foreign and yet strangely fulfilling. For the first time since her arrival, the bride felt less like a lost traveler and more like part of something. But as evening approached, the weight of her reality returned. At supper, the room buzzed with the children's laughter, but her heart remained heavy. She set down her spoon and spoke quietly. "I should explain something. I wasn't meant to come here. My journey was for another man, one who lives across the county. Somehow my path was mistaken." Jacob's eyes widened and Lily's spoon clattered to the table. "You're leaving?" the little girl whispered. The bride's throat tightened. "Yes. Tomorrow I'll go to where I was supposed to be." The silence that followed was heavy. Jacob looked down at his bowl, pushing food around without eating. Lily's lip trembled, her big eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. The rancher cleared his throat. "That's how it should be," he said firmly, though his voice was not as steady as he intended. "You don't belong here." The words stung more than she expected. She had known it all along, but hearing them spoken aloud left her chest aching. Later that night, as she stood near the children's room, she overheard Lily's soft whisper once again. "Jacob, I just know it. God sent her to us. I don't care what Pa says. She's meant to stay." The bride pressed her hand against the doorframe, heart trembling. She wanted to correct the child, to remind her that she had another future waiting. But deep inside, a question began to stir. What if Lily was right? What if this mistake was no mistake at all? The ranch house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls and made every sound feel sharper. A storm brewed in the distance, low rumbles of thunder rolling over the plains. The bride sat by the fire, mending a small tear in her dress. The children had gone to bed, and the rancher was outside checking on the animals before the rain arrived. Her thoughts churned restlessly. Tomorrow, she reminded herself, she would leave. Tomorrow, she would be back on the road toward the man she was meant to marry. And yet, with every hour spent here, with every smile from the children, with every glimpse into this broken but beautiful home, she felt her resolve weakening. She folded the fabric neatly and climbed the stairs. The hallway was dim, lit only by the flicker of a lamp. As she passed the children's room, she paused, hearing the soft murmur of voices. Inside, Lily knelt beside her bed, her little hands clasped tightly, her head bowed. Jacob sat on his own bed, watching quietly as his sister whispered. The bride leaned closer, straining to hear. "Dear God," Lily said in a hushed, earnest tone, "thank you for sending her. Please don't let her leave. We needed a mama, and now we have one. Don't let her go away." The bride's throat tightened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She had never been prayed for like that before. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding with an ache she couldn't name. Jacob's voice joined, hesitant but honest. "Pa says she ain't stayin', Lily. You shouldn't hope for something that ain't true." The little girl shook her head firmly, braids swinging. "Pa doesn't know everything. God finally sent her to us. I just know it." At those words, the bride could no longer hold back the tears. She stepped quietly into the room, her presence startling them both. Lily's eyes grew wide and Jacob sat up straight, embarrassed to be caught praying. The bride knelt beside the little girl, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her voice trembled. "Lily, why would you pray for me like that?" The child's answer came without hesitation. "Because we've been asking God for a long time. Jacob asked for help with the ranch. I ask for a mama who will love us, and Pa, well, he doesn't say it out loud, but I know he asks too. And then you came." The bride's vision blurred with tears. She gathered Lily into her arms, holding her close. The little girl clung to her tightly, whispering again against her shoulder, "God finally sent you to us." Those words pierced, deeper than anything else could have. The bride had thought she was lost, misplaced, an error in someone's plans. But to this child, she was the very answer to a prayer. Jacob, still cautious, watched quietly. His eyes searched hers, as though trying to decide if she was truly meant to be here. The bride reached over and squeezed his hand. "I can't promise the future," she whispered, "but I promise you this. You are both so loved." A flicker of hope crossed the boy's face, though he quickly looked away, unwilling to show too much. Later that night, as she returned to her room, she found the rancher standing in the hallway. His eyes, shadowed in the lamplight, told her he had heard enough of the exchange. "You shouldn't fill their heads with dreams that can't come true," he said softly, though his voice carried the edge of old wounds. She lifted her chin, wiping her tears. "They're not just dreams, they're needs. Needs you can't meet on your own. Needs you've been praying about, whether you admit it or not." For a moment his hardened expression faltered. His lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her heart caught between two worlds, her duty to leave and the pull to stay. As the storm broke outside, rain lashing against the windows, the bride lay awake in bed. Lily's whisper echoed in her mind, over and over. "God finally sent you to us." And for the first time since she left home, the bride wondered if perhaps her path had not gone wrong at all, but exactly right. The days that followed seemed to blur together as though time itself refused to behave. Each sunrise reminded the bride that she should have already left, and each sunset tied her heart a little more tightly to the family she had stumbled upon. Every morning she told herself she would ask the rancher to take her into town so she could be delivered to the man who had been waiting for her. Yet somehow she never spoke the words aloud. There was always another reason to delay: a fence that needed mending, bread that needed baking, or Lily tugging at her skirt, begging her to stay just a little longer. The rancher noticed her hesitation. Though he rarely said much, his guarded eyes revealed a storm of emotions. He tried to keep his distance, tried to treat her as nothing more than a guest passing through. But every time he saw her laughing with the children, or kneeling beside Lily in prayer, or carrying water with Jacob in the barnyard, something inside him shifted. One evening, after a long day's work, he found her in the kitchen. She was humming, softly, her hands busy with dough as the children giggled nearby. For a moment the scene struck him like a memory, like his wife Sarah was alive again, filling the home with warmth. He froze, heart pounding, before stepping back outside to steady himself. Later, as they sat by the fire, he finally spoke what had been weighing on him. "You've been here too long," he said, voice low and firm. "People in town will start to talk. It isn't proper for a woman to be staying under my roof like this." The bride looked up, startled. She had been expecting this, but it still stung. "I know," she whispered. "I've told myself every day I should go, but..." She trailed off, eyes drifting to the staircase where the children slept. "But what?" he pressed, though his voice carried more hurt than anger. Her hands tightened in her lap. "But every time I think of leaving, I see the way Lily looks at me. I see the way Jacob listens when I help him with his lessons, and I can't explain it, but I feel like I was meant to be here." The rancher's jaw clenched. He stood and paced the room, his fists curling at his sides. "Meant to be? You were promised to another man. Do you think he's not wondering where you are? Do you think he hasn't been waiting?" His words cut deep, reminding her of the duty she had almost forgotten. She lowered her gaze, shame flooding her chest. "You're right," she said softly. "I gave my word. I was supposed to be his bride." For a long moment, silence hung heavy. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the room. Finally, the rancher stopped pacing. His voice was quieter now, roughened with pain. "I can't let myself believe you're meant for us. I buried that kind of hope a long time ago, and I won't let my children suffer if you decide to walk away." Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. "I would never want to hurt them. That's what makes this so hard." The following days were filled with unspoken tension. The children clung to her more tightly, sensing her inner struggle. Jacob became more protective, always watching her, as if afraid she might vanish without warning. Lily, on the other hand, refused to let go of her faith. She whispered her prayers louder now, as though daring God himself to listen. One afternoon, while hanging laundry under the open sky, the bride overheard a neighbor passing by on horseback. The woman eyed her sharply, muttering just loud enough to be heard. "A stranger livin' in his house. What will folks think?" The bride's cheeks burned, shame crawling up her neck. She had known the rumors would come, but hearing them spoken aloud pierced like a blade. That evening she told the rancher she would leave at first light. He said nothing, only nodded stiffly. But when he turned away, she caught the flicker of sorrow in his eyes. That night, as she lay in bed, torn between duty and the growing bond she could not deny, Lily's words came back to her once more. "God finally sent you to us." She pressed her face into the pillow, torn by the cruelest struggle of all, the pull between what she owed to her past and what her heart was beginning to long for. The morning of her planned departure arrived beneath heavy skies. Dark clouds gathered over the plains, carrying the scent of rain and thunder. The bride rose early, her suitcase packed neatly by the door. She told herself this was right. This was what must be done. The rancher was distant as he saddled the horse that would carry her into town, his jaw set tight, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The children hovered nearby, their faces pale with unspoken dread. But before she could climb into the saddle, the sky split open. Thunder cracked, and sheets of rain poured down, soaking the ground in moments. The rancher muttered under his breath, pulling the horse back into the barn. "Roads'll be too dangerous. You can't travel in this storm." So once again, she stayed. The storm raged through the night, wind howling against the shutters. The family huddled inside, the rancher keeping the fire high while the bride calmed the frightened children. Lily clung to her side, whispering through tears, "You can't leave now. God won't let you." But the storm was only the beginning. By morning, the creek that ran along the back pasture had overflowed, tearing down part of the fence and scattering cattle across the flooded fields. Without hesitation, the rancher grabbed his gear and ran out into the rain. Jacob followed, determined to help. The bride watched from the doorway, fear tightening her chest. The waters were strong, the mud deep, and the cattle panicked. She couldn't just stand there. Lifting her skirts, she ran out into the downpour. "Go back inside," the rancher shouted, fighting to keep his footing in the rising water. But she pressed forward, grabbing hold of a loose rope to guide a frightened calf back toward safety. Mud splattered across her dress. Rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't care. All that mattered was helping. For hours, they battled the storm together, herding cattle, patching fence lines, and pulling Jacob free when the boy nearly slipped into the current. At one point, the bride's foot sank deep into the mud and she stumbled. Strong hands caught her, rough, calloused, but steady. The rancher pulled her close, his eyes locking with hers through the rain. "You shouldn't be out here," he growled, though his voice shook with something more than anger. She held his gaze, breathless. "And leave you to fight this alone? I couldn't." For a moment the storm around them faded and only the storm between them remained. Unspoken feelings, fierce and undeniable. Then Jacob's cry pulled them back and they rushed once more into the chaos. By nightfall the storm had passed, leaving the land battered but intact. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, The family gathered around the fire once again. The rancher glanced at the bride, his eyes softer now, his walls cracked by what they had endured together. "You saved Jacob today," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We saved each other." Silence followed, heavy with words neither dared to speak. The children had already fallen asleep, Lily curled against the bride's side as though she belonged there. The rancher stared at the sight, his throat tightening. He wanted to push her away, to remind himself she was not his to keep, but his heart betrayed him. The following afternoon, the storm's true test arrived, not in rain or wind, but in the sound of approaching hooves. A rider came down the trail, a man in a clean suit and polished boots. The bride's breath caught. She knew him instantly, the man she had been promised to. He dismounted with a polite smile, though his eyes scanned her with a cold, calculating air. "There you are," he said smoothly. "You were meant to be my wife. What a mix-up this has been." The rancher stood stiffly, his body tense as stone. Lily clung to the bride's dress, her little voice breaking. "Don't go." The bride's heart twisted. Here, at last, was the life she was supposed to claim. And yet, when she looked at the man before her, her soul recoiled. His eyes held no warmth, no kindness, nothing of the love she had seen in this house. The rancher finally spoke, his voice low. "It's her choice." The air grew heavy. The bride's chest rose and fell as she looked between the man she was, promised to, and the family who already saw her as their own. Fate had placed her at a crossroads, and for the first time, she realized this was not an accident at all. This was a test of destiny. The yard was silent, except for the dripping of rainwater from the eaves and the restless stamping of the stranger's horse. The bride stood frozen, torn between two worlds, the future she had promised in letters, and the life her heart was now tied to. The man who had come for her adjusted his gloves impatiently. "Well, gather your things. We've lost enough time. Already?" His tone was clipped, as if she were not a bride to be cherished, but property that had finally been recovered. Her fingers trembled against her skirts. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The rancher stood behind her, arms folded across his chest, his face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed the storm inside him, hope warring with fear, love battling with the dread of loss. He wanted to speak, to beg her to stay, but pride held his tongue. He had promised himself he would not chain her here, not the way grief had chained him for years. Lily broke the silence. The little girl darted forward, wrapping her arms tightly around the bride's waist. "Don't go," she whispered fiercely. "Please don't go. God sent you to us. If you leave now, he'll take you back." Tears filled the bride's eyes. She dropped to her knees, holding the child close, her heart aching at the desperation in that tiny voice. Jacob stood nearby, his fists clenched, his jaw set as though trying to be brave. The stranger scowled. "This is nonsense. Children grow attached too quickly, that's all. You don't belong here, you belong with me." His words struck her like cold steel. She looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time. The man she had agreed to. Mary was not cruel exactly, but neither was he kind. His eyes held no warmth, no tenderness. He spoke not of love nor of family, but of obligation. A life with him would be secure, perhaps, but empty. Her gaze shifted to the rancher, the man who had never once promised her anything, and yet had shown her more of himself in a handful of days than others might in a lifetime. He was flawed, yes, hardened by loss. But she had seen his love for his children, his strength in the storm, and the quiet way his heart longed for healing, even when he tried to hide it. In that moment, the choice became clear. She rose to her feet, her voice trembling but firm. "I cannot go with you." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" She drew a steadying breath. "I was meant to marry you, yes. But sometimes God writes a different story than the one we plan. And my story, it's here." She looked toward the rancher, tears shining in her eyes. "With them." Lily's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around the bride again. Jacob's shoulders relaxed, relief washing over him. The rancher, however, stood motionless, stunned by her words. He opened his mouth, but the stranger cut in, his voice sharp with anger. "This is foolishness. Do you know what you're giving up? A proper life, a proper marriage." The bride shook her head. "A proper life without love is no life at all." The man's jaw tightened. With a huff of frustration, he mounted his horse. "You'll regret this." Without another word, he turned and rode off into the distance, his figure swallowed by the horizon. Silence lingered in his wake. The bride's chest rose and fell as though a great weight had been lifted. She turned slowly toward the rancher, uncertain of what she might find in his expression. For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then, with a voice roughened by emotion, he spoke. "You'd truly choose this life? Hard work, long days, and a stubborn man who don't know how to say what he feels?" She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't need perfection. I need honesty. I need love. And I've found both here." His breath caught, and at last the wall around his heart crumbled. He reached out, taking her hand in his calloused palm. "Then stay. Not for the chores, not for the children alone, but for me. Stay because I can't imagine this ranch without you now." Her tears spilled freely as she nodded. "I will." The children cheered, their laughter filling the room. Like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, Lily clapped her hands, shouting, "I told you God really did send her to us." The rancher pulled the bride into his arms, holding her as though he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. The loneliness that had haunted the ranch for years melted away, replaced by warmth, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. Outside, the sky cleared, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the land. The ranch, battered by storms of both nature and sorrow, now stood as a place of healing and love, and so what began as a mistake became the greatest blessing of all. A bride sent not to the wrong ranch, but to the only one where she truly belonged.